the modern term. Mind training is like a bulletproof vest. It's like you protect yourself internally, and externally, whatever happens, we react appropriately. You have the space of mind. You have the calm. You are calm enough. You're not in any way excited. You're calm enough to generate wisdom and act appropriately. You're like, you have this inner, you have this, around your mind, there's a bulletproof vest. Doesn't affect you. And if greater than that, your mind is moistened by love and compassion, right? Doesn't affect you at all because your mind is moistened in that way. So that creates that bulletproof vest. Anyway, it strengthens it, and you act out of that. And so these mind trainings are all just mental states. They don't necessarily reflect the external. You know, in His Holiness the Dalai Lama, sometimes, and excuse me, this is not meant disrespectfully, but sometimes people see His Holiness as a cuddly bear, like a, you know, good-natured. He's not always like that. I've seen His Holiness very wrathful. I've seen him once so scary. I tell you what happened. Which showed His Holiness's wisdom, psychic abilities, and wrathful compassion. It was in a teaching many years ago, when His Holiness would give 2-3 weeks of teachings during Losar. Morning and evening. 3 hours morning, 2 to 3 hours morning, 2 to 3 hours afternoon. Those were the days. And it was Losar. It was around Losar. So we always have like a mini monsoon, which is not warm as this monsoon, but it rains. It's really cold. And I remember this teaching on the great Lamrim. His Holiness taught the great path, or the teachings of Lama Tsongkhapa, the great Lamrim, or the teachings on the graduated stages of the path to enlightenment. Okay. And I was downstairs because it was raining so hard, and I was there with an Australian friend, another nun. We were downstairs because everyone had moved upstairs, but there was no space, so we were downstairs underneath the roof and just sitting there and be cold and reading. And there was a screen so we could see His Holiness. And suddenly His Holiness said, "You!" Everyone went, "Oh!" Me? You! There's someone in the audience, we couldn't see them. "Get up! You, don't hide, get up." Right? So apparently this person, whoever His Holiness pointed at, was trying to hide. Obviously, trying to get away. I mean, that's so scary. He said, "Get up, get up." And he wouldn't get up. And so one of the bodyguards basically had to, he was so scared, of course. I mean, who is it who gets pointed out in front of everyone and has to get up? So eventually he got up and His Holiness said, "Leave." And he had to leave. I was so shocked. Oh, am I sitting right? Am I doing everything right? Does His Holiness see me? Right away. And that was like, wow, that was so bizarre. It never happened, and it never happened after that. I was so surprised. And he wore long sleeves, but you know, you don't get kicked out because you wear long sleeves as a monk. I mean, the way you're dressed is up to you. No one, I mean, maybe some of us would say, well, don't wear long sleeves. But no, that wasn't a problem. And just nodding off, well, he's not the only one. So, therefore, later on I heard, so it was just after a while, they now they started to check. He came from a particular monastery in the south. No, it doesn't matter which monastery it was. And he lived in there, and the monks, after they heard His Holiness had kicked him out, they started researching right away. There must have been something. And they had the suspicion that he had stolen from other monks, but he could never prove it. So they broke his lock. They never went into his room. They broke the lock to his door, and they found all this stolen stuff. So he had stolen from other monks. And that is serious. You break your vows. And for this person, it was the best. I mean, this was very wrathful. It was shocking. He had to leave the monastery. But I guess His Holiness had a sense, no, this is enough. Enough is enough. Yeah? This is, you can't allow this for this. And although the monks already, but they didn't have enough proof to go into his room and so forth. But that was sufficient for them. And yeah, it was terrible for this monk, but I'm pretty sure he stopped what he did. I mean, I'm pretty sure he stopped stealing. Anyway, he was made to stop. That was the one time I remember that His Holiness was wrathful. I mean, really wrathful. I've seen him also strict and stern and so forth, of course, in certain situations, but that was the strongest I've ever seen him. And actually in Namgyal Monastery, which is His Holiness's personal monastery, there is a rule: when a monk does something wrong and His Holiness scolds him for it, he has to go. But it never happens. His Holiness never scolds them. As far as I've heard this, I heard this rule many years ago, and I said to a Namgyal monk, I said, "Oh, that's terrible." He said, "Don't worry, he never does that." I don't think, I mean, there must be really something really, really grave. I mean, of course he's there for the benefit of them. He doesn't want a monk to be kicked out. Of course not. But there is that rule. There is that rule. So it shows that even a lama, a high lama, who's totally controlled by deep love, compassion and altruism towards everyone, can, when the situation requires it, be very wrathful. Bless you. Bless you. I'm laughing because it reminds me of my friend. I want to hear a funny story. It's got nothing to do with anything. Reminds me of my good friend who has a cat called Tsering. We called it Tsering, actually. Why? Because she really wanted to learn Tibetan. And she never really got around it. She's from Germany. And at least she wanted a word to say, "Bless you," after someone sneezes. Because in Germany, you always say good health, basically, right? So bless you. So she learned that. And so she's in a store, in a Tibetan store, and someone goes, sneezes. And she goes, "Tsering." And this guy comes running, "Yes." Because there's a name. So when you say, it's actually Tsering. Tsering is the name of the person, but when you say long life, you pronounce it slightly differently. And anyway, no one says it. So she said it the way it sounded like the person's name. So she kind of shouted, "Tsering," and this guy comes running, "Yes." So afterward, we call the cat Tsering. It's just so sweet. Anyway, it just came up the other day. So when you sneezed, I was reminded of that. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Let's go back to scolding lamas and no. Okay. Oh, no, that was one part, excuse me. Yes, so that was your question, in response to your question. That was important to understand that. But also in response to your question, exactly, on karma. I said yesterday, and a few times I think I did, that karma can be stronger than the Buddha. It can be stronger. It doesn't have to be. So it seems, upon hearing that, if someone has the karma to die, then not even the Buddha can do anything about it. But that doesn't mean this is true for every karma. Which means that there are certain karmas, or you can have, let's put it that way, you have the karma to die, but you also have a karma to be saved. It's not as black and white. So when we say karma, sometimes we think of it as like one concrete thing. We are caught in karma. Like some kind of glue. We're glued within karma. There's nothing we can do. Now, karma is not a glue. It's an ever-changing phenomenon because our actions keep changing. Our action keeps changing and our karma keeps changing as well. Because we talk about negative karma can be purified. So positive actions, if we now engage in positive actions, there are certain practices we can intentionally engage in to intentionally purify negative actions. But even without engaging in them, these very focused actions, our virtuous action on a day-to-day basis can purify negative ones. But positive karma can also be destroyed by by actions motivated by anger. So you destroy them. And there's a constant flux, an ever-changing situation of our karma, the actions we accumulated, and so forth. And so therefore, for instance, to give you an example, you may have the karma to be rich because you were generous. But that karma could be not strong enough to ripen in itself. It is such a karma that it can only ripen if you work hard. Right? So there's some people, it's not like they're born into a rich family or they win the lottery. They work hard and they become rich. Others work as hard as they get, but they don't have the karma to get rich. They work so hard and they have the bare minimum. So it's a little bit more complicated than just, like one karma. No, we have accumulated the karma to die prematurely. All of us, like I said yesterday, we've accumulated endless karma. But we may have also accumulated the karma when such a situation arises. There is something that can be done, that can be counteracted, we can be saved. So it comes close to us dying, and then, I don't know, a doctor remembers, oh, there's this treatment method, I could do it, and you're saved. So it's like they interact with each other all the time. That's why when we see a person in distress, we're not encouraged to think, it's their karma, tough luck, I've got mine, they got theirs. No, we need to find out whether they have the karma to be helped by helping them. We go out, we do something, because they're very likely to have the karma to be helped. And then when we help, and they get better, they had the karma to be helped. If nonetheless they die, then we need to also accept that. So in some situations, of course, they don't go out of existence. They continue in a different way. And hopefully they've exhausted that negative karma now. And now better stuff is happening. I mean, we think of death as the end of everything. But it isn't. It's the end of one thing and the beginning of something new. Right? Death. For us, it's like we just always think along the lines of this life. And death is the end of everything. Every moment is a death. Every moment is the death of the previous situation and the beginning, the birth of something new. If you think about it, every new day is it's the last day is gone, it's dead, it's gone. It will never come back, right? Okay, you've got your memories, but how many memories do we really have? Do you remember last week what you had for lunch? If you were in Tushita, you may remember, but right, honestly, there's so much we don't remember. I mean, we don't have great memories. I mean, a lot of them at least. So, therefore, basically, at the end of this life, even if someone dies, of course they continue on. And even if terrible things happen to them towards the end of their life, well, great things may happen in the future. So, we need to think wider. We have a tendency just to see right now, this life, but think wider. And also, think wider in terms of karma. If constantly we create new actions that influence the karma we've created previously, it perfectly makes sense that we're not stuck in the glue of our karma. And we always, that's most important, yes, and if a person experiences something, it is the result of some action that was accumulated by a former continuum of that person. Yeah? But they also accumulated other actions, and everyone has potentially the karma to also be helped. That's why we need to help. But sometimes, no matter what we do, in that moment we can't do, and then, okay. Or in my own case, it's better to think of karma in our own case. Sometimes I try everything to avoid something, and I just cannot. And then to think, okay, I have accumulated such a karma, I need to just accept it, but it's impermanent. The situation, the moment the problem has arisen, has already changed. I go, oh, disaster, and I got used to it, and I learn to live with it, and right? It's never that we're caught in problem, oh, problem. No. Second, there's the thought problem, and then we move on. Victim, we're a victim for one moment, we're a perpetrator the next, and things change again. So see it in the context of dependent arising, how everything is dependent on each other, in the context of impermanence, constant change, and then karma takes on a different meaning. So therefore, in the case of the Buddha, in many cases he could help, and he would help immediately. But in some cases, which are probably rarer, there's nothing that could be done. Yes?
It's just a slight clarification. What I thought I understood yesterday was...
Can you speak up a little bit?
Just a clarification
yes.
on that.
Yes.
What I understood yesterday was mind and a body come together through karma.
Yes.
Like a particular body.
Yes.
Once that body had exhausted its sad karma,
yes.
basically the body dies and the
Oh,
the whole process. So I
yes.
just want to check, in that case, how does free will come into that?
Okay, that is actually a very clever question. That is a very clever question because you're right. You're pointing out something that that requires me to be a little bit more specific. That there are actually two types of karma. Projecting karma, as it's sometimes called, or propelling karma, and completing karma. I was actually more talking about completing karma when I talked about the situation of someone dying and so forth. Okay, now this part is important. There is a particular karma which is responsible for where we're reborn. It can be one karma, it can be many karmas acting together, never mind. But at the time of our death in our previous life, the time of death in our previous life, why were we reborn? Because we wanted to exist. Just after we had died, you know, when you die, at the moment of death in your previous life, when your mind and body start to separate, you get a sense, I'm disappearing. And because of our self-centeredness, there's this strong attachment to existence. I don't want to go, no! You hold on. You don't. It's like, whoa, it's a really strong grasping. Like, oh no! And that triggers a very powerful karma, which can be a particular strong karma or a combination of many that now throws you in a new existence. It's what we want. It's because of the self-centeredness we have, the strong need to exist. And its existence, we don't go like, I want nirvana. No, it's like, I want this. Right? It's not like even we aim for it. No, we want to continue to exist like this. It's our attachment. We can't help it. It's on a really deep level. It's beyond our ordinary control. And that triggers that karma, which is called projecting karma. And you project it in a new rebirth. That is, once it's ripened, you can't do anything about it. You're human. You're not going to turn into an elephant or a celestial being. You're human now. You're stuck with this body. Okay? That's called a ripening karma, in that once it's ripened, there's not much you can do unless, of course, you shorten your life through suicide or, I mean, you know, but the point being, and that doesn't, you may be reborn in a similar state again because the karma isn't exhausted yet. Or what's also, or on top of that, what's on top of that is that it comes with a certain expiry date. Like I said earlier on, it's a weird way of putting it, but it has a certain lifespan that after that cannot be extended. So in that case, if it's not a premature death, then even a completing karma, even another karma could not protect you. So, but there are also what are called completing karma. So besides the karma that throws you into this one existence, we have endless completing karmas that are responsible for our gender. There's some debate on that, but usually I think most agree that the completing karma, the throwing or the propelling karma or projecting karma. Sorry, there's so many translations in English. Sometimes it's called projecting, propelling, throwing. Anyway, that which throws you into the new existence, that is now assisted by all these completing karmas. What gender, what country you're born in, what family, what you look like. And in each moment of your life, different completing karmas ripen. Right? Accounting for new experiences, new situations, and so forth. And they are very much malleable. They can be changed. Through our actions, negative ones can be purified unless they've ripened already. But even if they've ripened, they can be counteracted to a certain degree, right? So anyway, there's a lot of possibility for change depending on our actions, especially purifying negative actions through virtuous action. There's a lot of obstacles we can actually stop before they arise. Certain karmas ripening in that way. But the problem is with the length of time that we're given in this, that cannot be extended. Ordinarily, it cannot be extended. So just looking at it from an ordinary perspective, no. So there's a certain, a time we're given, basically, or we've given, no, it sounds like we've given ourselves, or that has basically ripened. Yeah? Does that make sense? But within that, like I said, there's a lot of possibility for change, and it's not like a glue in that way. However, if you encounter someone, they've lived, I don't know, for usually, human lifespan is pretty long, right? It's actually become longer recently. I don't know whether it was the expiry date of throwing karma was shorter, maybe 100 or 200 years ago, or whether there were more obstacles. The expiry date was the same, but there were more obstacles, less hygiene, more disease and so forth, that triggered certain karmas. I don't know, I can't tell. But the point is that usually it's around 70, 80 years, whatever, and no one can live beyond that. No one can extend that. Does that make sense? So I think that's important about karma. It shouldn't be misunderstood. It just means actions that are volitional, that lead to certain experiences. I can just add something while we're at it. Let me ask you, when someone steals from you, is that necessarily a negative karma? Does this necessarily come from stealing from someone? What do you think? Is it necessarily a negative karma? I'm saying stealing something valuable from you. I'm not saying stealing your disease from you or something. No. I'm talking about something valuable. Is that necessarily a negative karma? No?
The result of a negative?
Is that necessarily the result of a negative karma?
What if it's like a good lesson for you to help you overcome attachment, and then it will be like a positive?
Oh, so it could help you to overcome. Okay. All right. Okay, so it could actually help you in the long term. Someone takes something away from you and it teaches you. Okay. Any other suggestion?
I would say it comes from the motivation behind why this person is stealing. Now, let's see.
Well, they have the motivation to steal from you. Let's say the person, okay, good. So now, in response to the other person has the motivation to steal from you, not to benefit you. Is the fact that someone stole from you the result of a negative karma? I can just say negative karma because that's always the same as saying the result of a negative karma. So, and is that a negative karma?
No, if I am trying to feed my family and I don't know a way.
No, sorry, are you talking about the thief or the one who...
I end up being the thief. My intention is to help my family.
No, but if I say you have a negative intention, it's out of greed. I'm saying the person who steals from you wants to steal from you because they're greedy. If that's your motivation and someone steals from me, I'm the victim in that situation, is that a result of my negative karma? You were first, I think? Yes? Yes, you? Yes?
Not necessarily, I think. It depends on, like, for example, I was thinking about the plane ticket. Someone knows that the plane will crash.
Okay.
They will steal your plane ticket
Okay.
so that you don't...
Someone steals your train ticket, your plane ticket, but you still experience, before you know the plane is going to crash. It's not like you hold this plane ticket, you know the plane is going to crash, and then you allow someone to steal it. That's not what happens, right? You don't know it's going to crash. So when they steal it from you, in that moment, isn't that a negative, in that moment before you know, later on you're like, I'm glad I didn't have my ticket, right? So you still experience the loss of your ticket, right? Yes?
I remember from the introductory course that it says it's always the same time. So the experience, the karmatic experience is always of the same time as the action generated.
Aha, very good. What did Mike just say? He said the experience need to be of a similar type to the action, right? Or in general, there can be some variations, but okay. So what could be an experience of someone stealing from me with a negative motivation that is now not a karma of stealing? Well, when I don't know about it. You've got a bank account, right? You've got a certain amount of money on there. Just a silly example. One of the bank employers steals a lot of money from you, but you don't notice. Then the bank is like, they find out, they discipline that person, replace the money, you never find out. So someone with a negative intention stole from you, you weren't aware of it. You never experienced the loss. With the plane ticket, the only other explanation, the way it would work would be if they steal it from you and you never know. And when you realize that it was stolen from you, the plane has already crashed. But usually you try to get on the plane, right? If you've got the ticket, so that would wouldn't really work. The point is really, it's not about what happens to you. It's more about the experience that goes along with it, right? So if you don't know someone stole from you, you're not aware of it, and pretty sure it happens. There are mistakes in the bank. Sometimes there are mistakes, and sometimes, very rarely, maybe an employer tries to get money, right? Or a hacker or someone, and they get caught before they can do anything, and the police just puts it back and never informs you. So then someone stole from you, but you never experienced it. So what I'm trying to say is, karmic results are really the experiences more than anything else. I mean, if you're born into a poor family and you never feel poor, you never have a sense, you never lack. From the perspective of another person, they would label poor. Maybe yourself would label yourself poor, but it's never a problem. You've got everything you want. In fact, you know you're happier than your neighbor who's very rich and, where things are difficult in the family. So therefore, that's another aspect I want to stress. It's not so much what happens to us, but it's how we experience it. Okay? And let's take another example. For instance, like a person who is so beautiful, externally so beautiful, but they feel ugly. That is their reality. Who's so intelligent, but they feel stupid. Their reality is their experience. Therefore, that is what counts. Very important. I think it's important for the idea of karma to really stress that again. Yeah. Okay. Great. God, I chit-chatted a lot today. I think we can still finish the text. Okay. Still pretty much at the beginning, but okay. So let's go back to now the answer by Avalokiteshvara. Now we know path of accumulation. So although none of these words give it away, but according to the different commentaries, and although there are a few variations, it is usually accepted that this answer, Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this: correctly and subsequently, or inferentially, here it says repeatedly, beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent existence. So, yes, if you read, for instance, His Holiness's commentary, which is very reliable, if you want to get, this is a great book, I just happen to have it because I used to teach the Emory students based on this book. So, anyway, here I seem to remember His Holiness also talks about subsequent realization. Emphasizing here that this means when you realize emptiness on the path of accumulation, at the very least, that's when you, at the very latest, you need to realize it on the path of accumulation. And as we've heard, on that level, you realize it inferentially, initially. For the first time, it's an inferential realization that arises subsequent to understanding the reasonings and how the reasonings are related to emptiness. And based on these reasonings, then you infer, oh, phenomena must lack inherent existence. So once you've inferred it, that inferring mind is called the mind, the inferential cognizer realizing emptiness. Right? I'll repeat it again. Of course, I say it again. Okay, so here, when it talks about correctly and subsequently beholding those five aggregates, is implying that you need to realize emptiness for the first time inferentially. Inferentially is another way of saying subsequent to understanding the different reasonings that prove emptiness, subsequent, after you've gone through this process of understanding the reasonings and how they relate to the fact that phenomena are empty of inherent existence, then you can understand the lack of inherent existence. Let me give you the example of fire and smoke. It's much easier. In order to realize there's a fire in your neighbor's house, you need to know the relationship between smoke and fire. You need to know a certain type of smoke. I'm not talking about steam. Okay? I'm talking about, let's say, for instance, wood smoke. That kind of wood smoke, let's say your neighbor has a wooden house. So the wood smoke is indicative of wood fire. It's indicative of that. It proves the existence of fire. Certain quality of smoke proves the existence of fire. If you know that relationship, and you perceive the reason is smoke, right? In my neighbor's house, there's a fire because there's smoke. We don't necessarily have to sit there. In my neighbor's house, there's fire because there's smoke, right? We don't have to put it in those words. But if someone else has no idea how I get to think that there's fire in my house, I would say, look, there's fire in the house. And they say, why? Because there's smoke. There you have it, right? In my neighbor's house, there's fire. Someone asks, why? Because there's smoke. Okay? Does that make sense? So therefore, that's really the process we go through. When we infer that there's fire, it just is so quick, we're not aware of it. But we do know the relationship between smoke and fire. We already know that. And then based on knowing there's smoke, we then infer, subsequent to seeing the smoke, we infer there's fire. Okay? Now, replace smoke with dependent arising. Replace fire with emptiness or lack of inherent existence. Replace the neighbor's house with the self. Let me repeat. In my neighbor's house, there is a fire because there's smoke. In my neighbor's house, that's the basis. What I want to prove is there's fire. It's the predicate, as it's sometimes called, that which I want to prove, the object to be established or proven, because there's smoke. We use this all the time. All the time we use this, such and such is da-da-da because. All the time. We get angry. I don't like this person because. And so forth. They're not always correct reasons, but it's that same structure. But now we have to spell it out. We have to explain this, because we don't go around, oh, there's dependent arising, therefore everything must lack inherent existence. It's not as easy. It's not like fire and smoke. Fire and smoke is very easy for most people who have a certain background. Now, we don't know what dependent arising means on the subtler level. We're not very consistent. It's easier to be accepted, but there's some limits to how far we understand dependent arising, and we're not. Our actions show, our afflictions show that in certain situations we totally neglect dependent arising. So first we need to fully understand dependent arising, and also understand the relationship between dependent arising and therefore lack of inherent existence. And then, based on the self, for instance, so instead of the neighbor's house, we take the I. So because the I is dependently arisen, it has to lack inherent existence. So subsequent to understanding that it's dependently arisen, we can infer that the I doesn't exist inherently. Right? Just as we can infer, subsequent to seeing that there's smoke, coming out of our neighbor's house. Our neighbor's house is the basis. There's smoke. Because of that smoke, we know that there's a fire. Because the self doesn't exist interdependently or in dependence on other factors, we need to internalize it, not on a superficial level. The thing is, there's not much depth in a fire and smoke, right? I mean, how deep do you need to understand smoke to know? That's different, but in the case of dependent arising, because of our misperception, we don't have really obstacles to seeing smoke and fire. We don't have any ignorance when it comes to seeing smoke and fire. Unless we're blind, then we have a problem, of course. We don't see the smoke in the first place, but we may be still able to smell it, at least. But in the case of dependent arising, due to our habitual tendency to hold on to inherent existence, dependent arising is not the first thing on our mind. It makes sense to some degree, but we're not totally consistent. Some things don't seem to have a cause. Some things seem to be totally negative. And it certainly doesn't seem as if it has to do with me labeling. Therefore, first we need to fully understand that. But when we understand that the self depends on causes and conditions and parts, and most importantly, it's merely labeled, right? Then we can infer it cannot exist inherently. You see? That's when we, for the first time, realize emptiness based on these reasonings. And of course, there are other reasons as well. The fact we cannot find the self. Look for it. Search for it. The way it appears to us, the self that appears to us is the inherently existent self. That's the one that appears to us. So let's look for it. If it's there, we should be able to find it. So we look for it within the 5 aggregates, not in our neighbor's body. The self, the way it appears to be here. Therefore, that's where we look for it. And if we can't find it, based on that, we can infer it doesn't exist inherently. It's not one with its parts. It's not separate from its parts. There's no other possibility. Therefore, it cannot exist. But of course, just saying that and thinking about it for 2 minutes, meditating on it for 15 minutes, 3 times, or 10 days, it's not going to do it. It takes more time, makes more time. But still, if we keep doing it, we keep doing it, eventually we'll realize it. And that's what you need to do once you reach the path of accumulation. If you haven't done it before, you can realize emptiness even before bodhicitta, before renunciation, you can realize it before it. You need a lot of positive potential, because that clears your mind from the afflictions, from all the obstacles. You know, positive potential, it's like a capital in the bank. It gives you possibilities. Virtuous actions are like a capital in the bank. They allow us to accomplish the things we wish for, especially in the positive direction, such as the Dharma. They're like a capital. So we need a lot of virtue, a lot of positive potential. Anyway, that allows us over time, of course, to realize it. But once we've entered the path of meditation, the path of accumulation, we've generated bodhicitta. Okay, whether we realized it or not before. Now, our main focus will be the realization of emptiness. If we've already realized it, fine. We can straight away go to accumulate or working on shamatha. If we haven't yet, then what we need to do is work on that, inferentially realizing. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, and that is implied here. This is implied here. A clarification?
Is it okay to say that wisdom is, emptiness is wisdom and dependent arising is method that we...
Is it okay to say, interesting, good question. Is dependent arising, does that belong to the wisdom aspect or to the method aspect? What do you think? Wisdom. Yeah, it's wisdom. It's actually wisdom. Just because it's not emptiness doesn't mean, you see, method has a lot more to do with aspiration, wishing to. For instance, generosity. Generosity is the mind that wants to give. It's the mind that is happy to give. Whether you have something to give or not, That's secondary. And giving is not necessarily generosity. If you don't want to give, I don't want to give it, it's my favorite. They want me to give it, so I give it now. I want my name on that building, so I give it now, right? That's not generosity. Yeah, that's not generosity. Or a beggar is like running after you the whole time and you feel so annoyed that you just give them some 10 rupees so they leave you alone. That's not generosity.
So, what is the difference between the emptiness that is realized without dependent arising and
There is no emptiness that is realized without dependent arising. In the sense that without an understanding of dependent arising, you can't realize emptiness. You remember? I said at some point, just the non-findability of something is not enough to realize emptiness. You're more likely to fall into extreme. You need to understand that phenomena, nevertheless understand dependently, right? The full realization of emptiness is given when to you the non-findability of something and emptiness and dependent arising are not contradictory. If you don't see a contradiction that, yes, when you search for the object, you don't find it. When you search, when you engage in this ultimate analysis, searching for something inherently existent, when you then don't find it, that is the case. But nevertheless, phenomena exist. They exist in dependence on other phenomena. They appear. They're dependent appearances. When both of you make sense, when you see no contradiction between the two, then you've realized emptiness. Therefore, dependent arising is just a fact. And it's an understanding of that fact. It belongs to the wisdom aspect, the recognitional aspect, the realizational aspect. Whereas method has more of this emotional, it's more of the emotional part of aspiring, wanting to give, wanting other sentient beings to be free from suffering, wanting them to be happy, wanting to attain enlightenment, wanting to overcome samsara. Those are all the methods aspect, aspiring towards. I don't know whether any mind that is part of the method must always aspire. That is debatable. But in general, the tendency is to aspire towards something. And that is then assisted by the rational aspect, which is wisdom. Right? So in an ordinary person, an afflicted person, a person who's governed by their afflictions like us, there is this rational aspect. But that is mixed with a misperception. And based on our irrational rationalization, we then get angry, want to harm the person, wish to harm another person, wish to not be near that person, wish for that person to experience problems. That's anger, right? Anger has got that quality of resenting that person, wanting to be away from them, based on some kind of weird rationality. They harmed us, they're stupid, they look in a way, they make a funny sound, etc. Yeah? Or attachment otherwise, working likewise. Now when we practice the Dharma, we try to leave behind this wrong reasoning and replace it with a correct reason, which does not lead to self-centeredness and the resulting anger, attachment, but instead love and compassion. They make perfectly sense. They are supported by the way phenomena exist. Does that make sense? Something as wholeness always says, the afflictions have no support in reality. The afflictive emotions, the anger and so forth, have no support in reality. Right? That's wholeness stresses that a lot. Love and compassion do. They make sense. So dependent arising, understanding dependent arising, that's part of the rational aspect. We need to develop that, dependent arising, emptiness and so forth. Then love and compassion make perfect sense. Nothing else makes any sense. Not just because we want to be happy. At some point we don't care if it makes us happy or not. It's the right thing. Yeah? Initially, we need to be wisely selfish. When you start Dharma practice, we keep saying, it's good for you. It's good for your karma. When you practice compassion, it benefits you. We need to work with a self-centered mind. You work with the self-centered mind. In fact, Nagarjuna said, you use the spare to pierce the self-centered mind. So you use the spare of the self-centered mind to pierce itself. You utilize the self-centered mind in the beginning. Oh, if I practice the Dharma, I'd be happier. If I practice the Dharma, people think I'm a better person. So it's okay. Initially, you start off with this. Yeah? They use the example of a woodworm that grows from within the wood. Where I like the example when I first came to Dharamsala, in the villages here, Dharamkot and Baksund, that there were no hotels. There was no hotel. There was only one pension where there was a family of soldiers living there. And they had 2 rooms to rent. That was it. No guest house. And there were lots of water taps. And the village ladies would come together with a bowl of ashes and their dishes. And they wipe the dirt, right? They wipe the dirt from the fire. Or sometimes they would just take some mud. And they use the dirt to clean the place. So they use dirt to remove the dirt. They used dirt. And sometimes they forgot their ashes, so I watched them. I took a handful of dust and then wipe it. And then rinse the plate. And it was perfectly clean. Very good for the environment. So that is like using the self-centered mind to then overcome it. You start to practice the Dharma. You use the self-centeredness. You make it your companion. Right? It's good for me. Until you realize, yeah, but it's actually in the way. Because it's based on a misperception of reality. And then you can remove it. Use it first and then you remove it. People sometimes ask me, how can you take a deluded mind and on the basis of that deluded mind, you turn it into an enlightened mind? And what I usually tell people is, how can you use the stiff body to practice yoga? It's a stiff body, it's useless. How can you make it flexible? Well, you use that same body, which is then transformed into a flexible body. You use a deluded and afflicted mind and transform it into a non-afflicted mind. The basis is something that, of course, is limited, is afflicted. But you use exactly what you have and you transform it. You use the mud to remove the dirt. You use dirt to remove dirt. You use an affliction. Okay, so you use the self-centeredness. You have to use it. You can't ignore it. If you ignore it, boom, right? You've got the rubber band effect. You don't want to suppress it. You work with it. Okay, self-centered mind, listen to me. You want to be happy? Don't be selfish. Don't harm this other person, right? Okay, so in that way you work with it. And eventually it'll grow weaker and it'll disappear. Just as your body, it's the stiff body you use, but the stiffness will slowly disappear and then you've got a flexible body. Right, okay, that's just... So, now, as I said, these words indicate the path of accumulation. Now there is some disagreement. Usually we follow 2 commentators, Tibetan commentators in fact. When we study the Heart Sutra, although there are 7 Indian commentaries that have also been translated into Tibetan, but the Tibetan commentaries, they very beautifully take all these explanations of these 7 commentaries and then explain it again. If you just study all the 7, there may be something missing. So they're really accessible. There are 2 actually. One is by Tendar Larampa. Tendar Larampa. He was a Mongolian actually. He was a monk from Mongolia. And they were both born around the same time. The Mongolian monk was born, they say, around 1758 and lived for about 81 years. And the other person is Kungtang Dembe Drome. Kungtang Rinpoche is sometimes called. So Tendar Larampa and Kungtang Dembe Drome, who was born 1762 and is said to have passed away 1823. I'll give you the dates later, or we can put them on the Yeah, we do. Yeah, I'll do that. Anyway, you can also Google them. It's not. It's like nowadays you find Tendal Lharampa, Tendar, Lharampa, Lhar. AMPA. I mean, we can put them on the board if you're interested. And they're translated. I have the commentary by Tendal Lharampa. I have it right here. I can make it available to you. I chose not to go through it because it mentions a few parts that are a little complicated and that require a lot of explanation. And I don't know it's necessary for you in that short period of time to understand all that. So to fully understand the Heart Sutra, I'll take as much as I can from these texts. Everything I say is really based on those two, but I don't want to overwhelm you. I would only do that if we had more time together. Overwhelm you. No, I mean give you all that information. Okay. So anyway, there's some. All I'm trying to say is that they don't necessarily agree with their explanation. So I'm following more the Mongolian commentary now than the Lharampas, because in this organization, in Tushita, they usually refer to that text. I could have made it available to you, but making all these photocopies and then not using it, I didn't see much sense in it. So maybe it makes more sense after you're done, just make the material available to you and you read it at your own time, since I'm already explaining a lot from it. So following now Tendal Lharampa, so he says that this answer, this is the concise answer that Avalokiteshvara gave, that I've now read a few times. It's only the beginning of the answer, it's just a concise answer. That indicates the path of accumulation. It directly indicates what is done on the path of accumulation, and indirectly also what you should continue to do on the path of preparation. Of course, you shouldn't, let go. You shouldn't neglect the practices you engage in on the path of accumulation, which would make sense. And then afterwards follows what's called a longer answer, which directly indicates the practices on the path of preparation, and indirectly the practices on the path of accumulation. Okay? So let's then move on. No, we can't move on. It's lunchtime. Well, maybe I'll just read it to give you a taste, something to reflect on, which you can then discuss. I'm going to read this to you. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. What does that mean? Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Don't need to write it on the blackboard or the whiteboard because you've got it right here. What could that mean? I mean, that seems after everything we talked about. So form is empty. Form here refers to the body. Of the 5 aggregates, it's the body. The body is empty. Emptiness is the body. Emptiness is not other than the body, and the body is also not other than emptiness. What does that mean? Enjoy discussing it. Yes, please.
Necessary to always look from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective?
No.
Also, like own experience?
Of course. Remember, I said in the beginning, bring in your own skepticism if you can, and implied by that is also bring in your own experience, of course. But it's still good to think, what do you think the author meant, right? What do you hear, but what do you also think the author could have meant after everything we talked about? Okay, great. All right, enjoy your lunch and see you again after the break.